Okay, so we're gonna continue on the leadership series, and depending on where we're at with time, I want to start with the idea of starting with talking about Pesach, and we have really good some really good commentaries to talk about. I just want to touch on the first part of Pesach, which is the Seder itself. Hopefully, we'll get there. If not, we'll do it tomorrow. But either way, so we're going to start with this. We're going to continue our leadership series. We're starting actually the book of Shemot. If you remember, we finished the book of Vayechi, and 1 second, we ended the portion with Parsha Vayechi. And do you guys remember what was the topic of Vayechi? What was it again? Do you remember? Eh, I don't remember either. Anyways, it's fine though. Okay, so we're going to wait, hold on, where we at? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, it was oh wow. It slipped my mind that quick.
It was surviving failure, surviving.
Yeah, surviving failure.
Yeah. It was the whole concept with Yosef and his brothers. And okay, so now we're in the book of Exodus. Jeez, we're in the book of Exodus now on this leadership series. Hopefully, we could keep pushing it. There's a lot of exciting stuff going on right now. You know what I mean? I'm just kind of like weeding my way through it and just pushing forward. You know what I mean? Like even though I say excited, the trajectory of the goals are so much further past the great things that are happening that you're kind of like, okay, it's great, but it's just a mechanism that goes forward. Okay, so here we are. Let's bring up the screen. Okay, so again, we're back with Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. We're learning his leadership series on the weekly Parsha, and we've finished the book of Exodus. Now we're starting the book of Shemot. What an amazing thing! We're starting a whole new book. We finished the book, and the beginning of Shemot is woman as leader, right? And this is probably a very like hallmark women moment for women because it's like, hey, what about us? Right? We're the backbones of these guys. What's going on? All right. So Parsha Shemot could be entitled "The Birth of a Leader." We see Moses adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, growing up as a prince in Egypt, and we see him as a young man for the first time, realizing the implications of his true identity. And he knows he is a member of the enslaved and suffering people. Wow, sounds familiar to me. And growing up, he went out there to see his own people, and he watched them, and he watched them at their hard labor. And he saw the Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. So the thing is, when you talk about the idea of Moses going out and seeing his brother and seeing them enslaved, you can see it like, yeah, like he was with the Pharaoh and he wasn't enslaved and they were free. But he knew Pharaoh wasn't his father, right? He knew he wasn't, in his house. But when he saw his brother, he realized that he may be wearing different clothes, but he's just as enslaved as, you know. So Moses coming to that reality. So he sees these two Egyptians fighting, which was like the beginning of a whole thing. That's coming in. Okay. All right. So sorry. So where we're at in this story is that we're starting off the story about the book of Exodus, right? And this is the time where Moses is born. Obviously, this is a humongous thing as we're preparing for Pesach. What an amazing thing to kind of go back a little bit and like live through this experience through the book of Exodus, right? Because we're already in a different era with Vayikra, right? But over here, we're going through that process, right? So what a beautiful thing. So we're starting the book of Exodus. Moses is on the scene. We're talking about that, and he's growing up in the palace. He sees his brother, and he's coming to these realizations. He sees a Jew fighting the Egyptian. What happens? He intervenes. He acts, and he acts the mark of a true leader. Right? We saw that with Abraham. He got involved. Right? We see him intervene three times: twice in Egypt, once in Midian, to rescue victims of violence. It's interesting. When we witness the great scene at the burning bush where Moses summons, where God summons him to lead his people to freedom, Moses hesitates. Moses hesitates four times until God becomes angry, and Moses knows he has no other choice. And he said, this is a classic account of childhood heroes. So that's an interesting thing. Like, so there's a few ideas around this. Not saying this is the point of where he's going with it. Obviously, he's building somewhere. But the thing is like this: Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, is one of my favorite commentators. He brings out the idea of he brings out the idea of the name Moshe, right? Which means, like in essence, in Hebrew, means to draw out, and it's a name. And I've said this before, so if you heard it, it's one of my favorite lines in his commentary. But it basically is saying that, like, if you Potiphar's daughter wanted him to know that she saved his life, so she gave him the name of Moshe, draw out, meaning he was drawn out by her, right? And so he grew up with this name, right? Imagine, like, the hero of the world, his name that was given to him was by an Egyptian woman, a person who was not Israel, right? Which is an interesting point. But the point is saying that I'm just getting over this cold a little bit, so I'm just like, stuff still coming out. You know what I mean? Cleansing, cleansing, cleansing. So, anyways, so Moses in essence grows up in this house, and he grows up with this concept of that he was rescued in essence, right? Because that's how he learns the story. He's in the Nile. This woman comes out, miraculously saves him, brings him in the Pharaoh's house. There was a decree against the firstborn or the males or whatever it was, right? And and that's how he grew up. And so what Rabbi Hirsch said is that the name that he was given shaped his character, right? It allowed him to see himself as a place of being rescued, and he wanted to rescue other people. And so he's honing in on this point of, his personality, right? Okay. And even says, I don't know if he's going to touch on this, right? But Rabbi Hirsch says when Moses tells God, when God says, I'm going to destroy the Jewish people, and God says, erase my name from your book, he's not defying God, but rather he's saying that my name is Moshe. I was born to draw out the people out of Egypt. That's what I'm here to do, right? And if you destroy them, I would have no purpose. So you are erasing my name from the book. The book is for me to rescue these people out. It's about me and my journey. You know what I mean? It's not on them. I'm the leader. So he had to say that, right? And maybe God wanted him to realize that, right? And that's another idea. So we'll see where he goes with this, right? Okay. Okay, so he says, but this is only the surface. The Torah is a deep and subtle book, and it does not always deliver its message on the surface. But beneath is another, and far more remarkable story, not about a hero, but about six heroines, six courageous women without whom there would be not have been a Moses. First, Yocheved, the wife of Amram, and mother of the three people who were become the great leaders of Israelites, Miriam, Aaron, and Moshe himself. It was Yocheved who, at the height of the Egyptian persecution, had the courage to have a child and hide him for 3 months and then devised a plan to give him a chance of being rescued. We know all, we all know. He says, we know all too little of Yocheved, and on her first appearance in the Torah, she is unnamed. Yet, reading the narrative, we are left with no doubt about her bravery and her resourcefulness. And he says, not by accident did her children all become leaders. So that's the interesting thing, no? Like Moses' mom was defying Pharaoh. She was defying the leadership that had decrees against the Jewish people or different than the Torah. And so she defied that. And that was in her nature, right? To defy evil, right? In that aspect, I guess her children inherited it. So it just wasn't by accident. And also, you got to think about the greatness of who's the woman who brings in the womb that brings in Aaron and Miriam and Moshe Rabbeinu. Like what's going on? Like who is she? You know what I mean? Like let's talk about reincarnation over there. You know, like who is that soul that had the power to bring in Aaron, Miriam, and Moshe? The second is Miriam, Yocheved's daughter, right? And Moses' sister. It was she who kept watch over the children as the ark floated down the river. She who approached Pharaoh's daughter with the suggestion that she suggested that he be nursed among his own people. He says in the Bible, the biblical text paints a portrait of a young Miriam as a figure of unusual fearlessness and presence of mind. The rabbinical tradition goes further. In the remarkable midrash, we read of how the young Miriam confronted her father Amram and protest him to change his mind, hearing of the decree that every male Israelite baby should be drowned in the river. Amram led the Israelites in divorcing their wives so that there would be no more children. And he had logic on his side. Could it be right to bring children into the world if there is 50% chance that they will be killed at birth? Yet Miriam, so the tradition goes, re remonstrated with him, or remonstrated. Maybe I'm saying it right. With him, with your decree. She said, "Your decree is worse than the Pharaoh's. His affects only the boys. Your affects all. He deprived children of life in this world. Yours will deprive life in even the world to come." He says Amram relented, and as a result, Moshe was born. The implications is clear. Miriam had more imuna than her father. So that's a big deal, no? Miriam's the one who pushed her dad to step up. It's interesting, like father-daughter relationship that comes out of that. He said the third and fourth were the two midwives, Shifra and Pua, who frustrated Pharaoh's first attempt at genocide. Genocide. He says, and told to kill the male Israelite children at birth. They feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Summoned and accused of disobedience, they outwitted Pharaoh by constructing a ingenuous cover story. The Hebrew women said that they are vigorous and give birth before we arrive. And they escape punishment and save lives. And save lives. He said the significance of this story is that it is the first recorded instance of one of the Jewish greatest contributions to civilization. The idea that there are moral limits to power. Oof. He said there are instructions that should not be obeyed. There are crimes against humanity that cannot be excused by the claim that I was only obeying orders. This concept generally known as civil disobedience. is usually attributed to the 19th century writer Henry David Thoreau. I don't know his name. And he entered the international consciousness after the Holocaust and Nuremberg trials. The true origins, although lies thousands of years earlier in the actions of the two women, Schiffer and Prua, although their understated courage to earn a high place among the moral heroes of history. That's interesting. You know, it's interesting about that too. I finished this. But he says, teaching us, teaching us the primacy of consciousness and over conformity, in law of justice over the law of land. Okay, so that's a very interesting point. So he's saying that that concept of defying power, absolutely, right? Absolute power comes, and you say, no, that is overstretching your ability to exert power, and you're incorrect, right? And it's interesting that it was two women who bring that idea, or three, right? They bring this idea to Pero. And so you think about it, I was just thinking about it. Well, you know what? Isn't that kind of like the relationship? Like, wouldn't that relationship come out of marriage? You know, like men, you know, we feel like we're powerful, we're running things, blah, blah, blah. And then someone who was like shorter than us, physically less stronger than us, they defy that power constantly. You know what I mean? And they bring like saying, well, no, that's too much. You know, that's not the way to do it, right? And I think it's something about appreciating that defiance, right? Like we could appreciate that feminine quality of defiance and say, no, it's a holy, it's a sign of the Jewish woman, right? It's a sign of the soul of the Israelite woman that she's going to, at times, speak to her husband in a way that Shifra spoke to Pharaoh. And he says, and the fifth is Zipporah, Moses' wife, the daughter of the Midianite priest, and she was nevertheless determined to occupy Moses on his mission to Egypt, despite the fact that she had no reason to risk her life on such a hazardous venture. In a deeply enigmatic passage, we see that it was she who saved Moses' life by performing a circumcision on her son. The impression we have of her is as a figure of monumental determination, who at a critical moment had a better sense than Moses himself of God, what God required. So that's another level, right? So one level we're learning about that aspect of woman is that dynamic of it's an interesting dynamic, right? One, we learn about Yocheved, and Yocheved, you know, is in that frame of the supreme mom, right? Like she brought the greatest prophets of human history. She brought the greatest prophet in human history. She brought the head of the Kohanim, of the priest, and then she brought the Miriam, who basically saved the world a couple of times, right? So I just want to just think this out for a second. So we learned about Yocheved. Yocheved, was part of this mission of defying absolute power. But the thing that was interesting about her is that her and her husband were divorced, and they came back together, right? Because it was the decree, right? And then the decree, created a separation between man and woman, right? And so they get back together, right? Why? Because his daughter also defied his power, right? His daughter came to his dad and said, your way of understanding halakha is wrong. Let's think about what's going on. He's the leader. He's not like a stom regular guy. This is the leader of the Israelites in that generation, the head of the chief rabbi. And his daughter comes to him and say, the way that you're understanding halakha is worse than what we're dealing with by the secular world. Is worse. And the father accepted that wisdom, and he was able to be the conduit to bringing Moshe Rabbeinu into the world. And then we have, and that's Yocheved and that's Miriam, right? And now we have this idea of Shifra and Pura, which is this idea of also women articulating this defiance to absolute power, and not to the head of the Israelites, like we saw by Miriam, to the head of the whole world, right? The source of negativity and ego in the whole world, right? And then now we're in this frame of Sephora, where Sephora was able to have an understanding that God wants of her, right? Of what God wants of her and her family and her husband greater than the greatest prophet ever lived. She was able to say that this is what needs to happen right now in order for you to be safe. She was able to give that to him. And so I think as men, right? I'm talking about all the younger guys and people trying to figure this thing out. You know, it's just to say that we're seeing that there's a divine aspect in some of the things that the secular society that we come from will say, like, oh, you're not being respected, right? She doesn't respect you, because they're not completely listening to exactly what you're saying and doing it exactly the way that you want to. We can see now clearly through the Parsha Shemot that there's a holiness in the divine. I'm not saying disrespect. We're not saying disrespect, right? Because if a woman is wants to connect to her husband, her frame of reference is to elevate the man to godliness, because the closer he is to God, the more light she receives from that vessel. So it's to her benefit. Sometimes I see these guys that, oh my goodness, you have no idea the stuff that is happening with people in their marriages out here. And one of the things I see that there's a fear of letting a person, go to those ultimate heights. I see sometimes that, like, sometimes, and I'm saying men, it's all, it's on us, right? Leadership. But I am saying there is a quality, because we're talking about women. There is a quality that I've noticed that some women have, right? It is more, I think it's less women that are married than it is women that are just in relationships. But they have this dynamic of knowing what things to do to make the man get upset, right? And they know what type of behaviors they are to get him upset, right? And for some reason, they have this inclination to do or manipulate or create this situation for him to get reacted. Now, that's also to teach him. He's supposed to elevate that, because he elevates above that. He's going to elevate that in real life outside of his home, right? So so it's nobody's a victim here. But however, what is the level of consciousness where I'm going to let that man become who he's supposed to be, and it's going to be outside of my control. I can't control him. I can't do that woman thing. He's not my child. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I see that with some of my fellow rabbis. They're not. They got people holding them back because they feel like, if he doesn't need me, if I'm not the center of everything, then maybe I'm not going to be valuable to him. So instead of letting him grow, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, and then it's gonna create this problem. And then if this problem is going on, we can deal with this. And he's gonna get reactive maybe and say certain things, and blah blah blah. So the point is just saying that, but we could learn as men differently, that component of that divine communication that may seem like defiance, but is really restructuring, which is really broadening perspectives, right? And so we're seeing the mechanism in Egypt of how there's a concealment of the light and there's a rising of the woman. And at times of challenges, it could be said, there's something there. But let's keep going. He says, I have saved. Okay, so this finish. He says, so yeah, so Sephora sees this thing, she figures it out, right? Which gives the impression she was able to see things Moshe couldn't. She says, I have saved until the last. He says, I have saved until the last, the most intriguing of them all, Pharaoh's daughter. It was she who had the courage to rescue an Israelite child and bring him up as her own in the very place where her father was plotting the destruction of the Israelite people. But it says something about Pharaoh's luck too, no? Could we imagine the daughter of Hitler or 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 who's this Eichmann Eichmann? I guess he's a Nazi guy. Or Stalin doing the same thing? He said, "Could you imagine Hitler's daughter? Like, he's like, it's an interesting idea, right? Hitler saying, kill all the Jews, God forbid, right? This is what he's saying. And Hitler's daughter's like, no, I have to save this Jewish child. And not only that, he has to grow up inside my father's house. Or any other, like, savage type people, right? Who just murdered millions of people. So he says, of all backgrounds, right? Or anybody they can get their hands on. He says, there is something at once, he said, there is something at once heroic and gracious about this lightly sketched figure, the woman who gave Moses his name. Who is she? The Torah does not give us her name. However, the first book of Chronicles, chapter 4:18, mentions the daughter of Pharaoh by the name of Batia. And it was she whom sages identified as the woman who saved Moshe. The name Batia sometimes rendered as Batia or Bitia, or so he's saying Bitia. I was just saying Batia because I was like, hey, maybe he's just spelling it that way, but my rabbi taught me the name was Batia. Okay, so he says Bitia in Chronicles, but he says, but some people say Batia. It's interesting because it's different letters, no? So he says, means the daughter of God. Wow. And he says, from this, the sages drew one of their most striking lessons. The Holy One, blessed be He, said to her, Moses was not your son, yet you called him your son. You are not my daughter, but I shall call you my daughter. Ooh, Mida connected Mida. And he says, and they added that she was one of the few of nine of he said he's one of the few righteous who entered the paradise in their lifetime. So this is the whole thing. So they said that there's like several people. Enumerate nine. I don't know. The tradition I was taught, it's in the Midrash that there were seven people who literally walked off planet Earth and they never died. Like Eliyahu Navi was one of them, and Batya was one of them too. Right? They never died. They just walked off. Right? And it's a whole thing. What does that mean? What does that happen? Whatever. But she was one of these people, and so she converted and joined the Jewish people. And so he says, so on the surface, the Parsha is about the initiation into leadership of one of the remarkable men. But just as beneath the surface is a counter narrative of six extraordinary women, without whom there would not have been a Moses. He says, and they belong to a long tradition of strong women throughout Jewish history, from Devorah, Hannah, Ruth, and Esther in the Bible to a more it's just to a more modern religious figure like Sarah Schneider and Nechama Leibowitz. So Sarah Schneider, she started the school, Beis Yaakov. It's like a whole thing. But the point is in the more secular figures like Anne Frank and Golda Meir. And so he says, and how then if now, the thing is, he just brought some modern figures, right? So I was thinking about it, you know, if we wanted to take women, say American women, African American women, Latino women, American Indian women, people who've had the American experience. And we really like, I guess that's what I guess it's like perfect timing. Was it like Women's Day, something like that? Was it this week? I don't know. It's like, I thought I saw some stuff, Women's Day. Anyways, but the point of the thing is to think about some of the things that we have in our own lineages of the women that came before us and the heroic things that they did, right? and the sacrifices that they made to keep families together, like Baruch Hashem, my parents have been married, a half a century, and that's a big deal. But as an adult, I know that they had to go through sacrifices. I know that they had to go through growing pains. They have all these kids now, grandkids, right? And and they went through this process and they made mistakes and they had successes and all these different things. Some of which you're able to understand as a kid and you weren't. But nevertheless, we all know our moms held everything together. You know what I'm saying? And we know that our grandma, Big Mama, held it together. You know what I'm saying? So this is also a moment that we could start reflecting on those heroic moments from our women, right? I mean, we had women who also spoke peace, spoke strength to power, right? We also had women that were fighting in the civil rights movement, fighting for equality, fighting against Jim Crow, fighting against police, you know, Black Panther women, fighting against, FBI, all type. You know what I'm saying? Like we had that. We had the Angela Davises and all these people. And I'm not saying I agree with their philosophies, but the point is just saying these are still great women from our community, right? And I'm not saying we don't praise those women and we haven't written books about these women or anything like that, but I'm saying I'm looking at it right now strictly from a Torah perspective. And to think about how people like myself, yourself, and many other righteous people from our community, we're Jews, right? But a lot of those sacrifices, a lot of things that they did created environments in society that allowed us to do what we're doing, even if we don't agree with everybody thinks. So he says, how then, if women emerged so powerfully as leaders, were they excluded in Jewish law from certain leadership roles? If we look carefully, we will see that women are historically excluded from two areas. One was the crown of priesthood, which went to Aaron and his sons. The other was the crown of kingship, which went to David and his sons. He says there are two roles built on the principle of dynasty succession. I know I didn't say dynasty, but whatever. He says from the third crown, the crown of Torah, and however, women were not excluded. These were the prophets, not just prophets. The sages enumerate seven of them. He says there. He says there. He says it says this in Megillah. So if you want to, I'm gonna look this up actually afterwards. But he says there. He says there, he said the Megillah talks about seven women prophets. Seven of them. And he says, and he said there were great female scholars from the Mishnah period, Briura and Ema Shalom. So my Sephora, one of her names is Brewery as well. So anyway, she should be blessed, protected, and constantly elevating. So it says like this. So he's saying that there's prophets, women were not excluded from prophets. He said, so when we think that, Judaism somehow excludes women, this, blah, 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 you may have a community that may take a certain hard line for whatever reason, but as a tradition, that's not the case. The only thing was high priest and being a king, right? Because those are specifically for David and his sons and Aaron and his sons. And and there were prophetess. And he said there were prophetess, not just prophets. The sages enumerate seven of them. He says at sake is a more general distinction. Rabbi Eliezer, in his responsa ben Av, differentiates between formal or he says formal or official authority, smicha, and actual leadership. He says there are figures who hold positions of authority, prime ministers, presidents, CEOs, who may not be leaders at all. They may have the power to force people to do what they say, but they have no followers. He says they excite no admiration. He says they inspire no illumination, and there may be leaders who hold no official position at all, but who are consulted for advice and help up as role models, but they have no power but great influence. He says Israel's prophets belong to this category. So did he says so often did the Gedolim Israel, the great sage of each generation. He says neither Rashi nor Rambam held any official position. Some scholars say that Rambam was the chief rabbi of Egypt, but most maintain that he was not. Though his descendants were. He says whenever leadership depends on personal qualities, what Max Weber calls charismatic authority, and not on official or title. There is no distinction between man and woman. Interesting. Man, woman, and he says Yocheved, Miriam, Shifra, Pura, Sapora, and Bitya or Batya were leaders not because of any official position in held. In the case of Batya, she was a leader despite her official title as princess of Egypt. They were leaders because they had courage in consent or conscience. He, he says they refuse to be intimidated by power or defeated by circumstance. They were real heroes of the Exodus. Their courage is still a source of inspiration today. Thoughts, reflections, ideas?
Yeah, Baruch Hashem. I think that the biggest thing is just this dynamic of the role of the woman, the role of the mothers, the daughters, just that whole essence within the nation itself. That it seems to me that the women really represent a very high level of when they're in their role, when they're in position, that they are of a high level of wisdom. And whereas with Amram, you have a situation whereas the enforcement or the walking out of wisdom is is his role, is the male's role. So you have wisdom present, but the movement of it is it seems like it really creates a very dynamic essence or dynamic action when the man is there to actually put life and put enforcement to wisdom. Whereas right here, it shows that this Amram, it's like he was blocking life. He was blocking um, prophecy. He was blocking these things or holding these things back based off of his understanding. But when Miriam shows up, it's like wisdom comes in and has the ability as his daughter to influence his decision, his thinking. And he yields to it. He realizes, this is wisdom. This is right. And it just, it makes me think about um just, growing up and just seeing, women, grandmothers, mothers, aunts, sisters, um, just really, you know, have to take the leadership role. And I believe that when we don't appreciate or acknowledge the dynamic of our women and the powerfulness of our women and the role of our women, I believe that we are neglecting a very powerful source within our lives. Because it was grandmother that was very consistent. I'm not to say that the men were not there, but the idea is that the men, for a child, if you think about it, a child is not going to see his father 24 hours a day. You know, he's not going to see that. Why? Because the father's out. He's working. He's doing different things. He's protecting the family, and he's not going to always be there per se. But the mother is consistently that pillar in that first foundation that child is going to know, and she becomes that level of consistency in that child's life. And when the father comes into that child's life on a day-to-day basis, the foundation is already set. And what he does is he really confirms that foundation. He supports that foundation. And he actually and on the other end of that, he actually um encourages that foundation. Now, it talks about how a foolish woman will tear a house down, but it seems like what's happening today is in reverse, which is very interesting. That is more so you see men tearing their house down, men restricting wisdom, men restricting or blocking, holding back wisdom. Um, and one other thing is that I think also for more of a physical, a natural understanding, just dealing with Amram, when it comes to even the giving of life, one thing that we see in Judaism is just this whole man is having children and growing a family, and even the respect and the honor of the women of the mother is like in such a high regard, opposed to what the Western culture has taught. You know, culture actually teaches and gives the mindset of Middle Eastern cultures, period, that the woman is like a second class citizen. It gives this mindset that she's being oppressed and that and then they find these women that are obviously they want to work against their own culture, and they love Western culture so much that they will voluntarily come out and just degrade their own culture. But what we see is, especially in Judaism, I can't speak for these other religions, I can't speak for Islam and whatnot, but what I'm seeing, what I'm learning in Judaism, man, is that the woman, the mother, the daughter, they are held in very, very high regard, because I believe that the realization is that without a righteous woman, it's very difficult for the priest to function, because he's trusting in his wife to have a kosher household. You see, and so this is a very, very, very powerful lesson. You want to say anything? Toda, Rabbi.
I like that breakdown on it, and you're right. It's 50-50. I mean, when I say it's 50-50, everybody's doing their 100%. But what I'm saying is, in terms of the balance, and that was one of the biggest like adjustments, for me, when I got married, was that it was like, okay, I'm not in yeshiva anymore. She's not, in her I mean, this is real life. What I mean? This isn't a class, like once you get married, you do this. Once you get married, you do that. You do this. This is what Shabbat is. This is how you do Shabbat. And I'm teaching it too, right? But now this is real life. It's like the door is closed, it's just me and her, right? And so, um, but a lot comes out of that. A lot of great things come out of that. But it is that partnership, because the goal in a Jewish marriage is to bring God's presence in the house. It's not just to serve God. And I would say, like, my parents, growing up in Islam, I'll say, like, that was a lot of Islam was like, serving God, being, surrendering to God, and all those other things, which is great because, it created an environment for us. My parents were still expressing that within their uniqueness, which allowed us to, me and my siblings, to really explore life. So they never held us to this thing like you have to be like this or this is the right way. They were like, we're trying to figure it out too in a lot of ways. But the point is just saying that it's a difference between having two people that submit to God versus two people who are focused on bringing God into the house, right? And so that concept of that strategy, right? Because that's like Like people will be like, you look at a person that goes out, and we'll close it out on this, but you see a person goes out and they're doing business, they're making money, they're just making millions, they just, and it's like, it's not like a movie star, you get a big check or something explodes you didn't know. No, we're talking about guys who are actively just doing business, and they're doing business at that level. You're like, wow, what a big desire that person has. Look, oh wow, they're worth like $15 billion, whatever, something crazy, right? And you look at that and you're like, wow, what a desire for life. But the thing is, as we talked about a long time ago, he's making that money just to get to a feeling. You know what I'm saying? He's making that money to get to a feeling. I don't care what he buys with it, he at the end of the day, when he lays in his bed with his Egyptian cotton sheets and his triple king size bed, whatever it is, he is looking for a feeling. If he doesn't get that feeling, he's going to go out and get drugs, or he's going to find that way to get it somewhere else. But the point is, he's looking for that feeling. And so that feeling is a connection to energy, right? And that energy, we understand it as a connection to the life force of Hashem, right? So we got the technology to go straight to the source. Now, the point is like this. If a guy who goes out and does the craziest things, even maybe the worst things, he's looking for that feeling too, but that's the only way he knows going about doing it. It's like a person who wants to be loved, but they feel the only way they can be loved is by giving themselves completely to someone else, right? That's the only way someone's going to love me, right? For whatever reason, they grew up this way, they have this belief system, whatever. But the point is just saying this is how they grew up, right? So this is how they believe. But the thing is, that same person who has had all these partners in their life because this is how they understood love, that same person with a different set of experiences and information could put that same passionate desire into one person, right? One person. And that power and that energy that could have been spread out to like 50, 60, 70, 80, 100, 200 partners, maybe even more, that energy could be focused completely in one person. So the point is saying that the people that we see do wicked in the world, a lot of them don't have another way other than getting to get energy, because there's energy on the dark side too. So when it comes to the couple, from a Jewish perspective, the whole dynamic is both of these people are greedy for the life force of the Creator. They're greedy. They're like a Bill Gates. They're like a Elon Musk. They're Jeffrey Bezos. They just want more and more light. They just want it. They want to be filled. They want to grow. They want to be more powerful. They want to be more sensitive. They want to be more compassionate. They want to be more humble. They want to be safe with their vulnerability, break through their limitations, right? So that's what they want. Selfishly. Selfish. But the way to get it is through sharing. The way to get it is through restriction. The way to do it is to be patient, to be humble, to be kind, to learn about kindness, to learn about patience, to learn about unconditional love, to learn about forgiveness, because I want to access that power in a relationship. The relationship is the mechanism for that power. It's the antenna. It brings the light down for everything. It's the satellite dish. So that is the key, and that's the key to the Jewish thing. It's because it's selfish. It's two selfish people for God's light that says if I follow the Torah in this way and you follow the Torah in this way and we do it together, we get the money. We get all the money in this lifetime and the next. That's it. That's the deal. Oh, but you got to be in love. You got to do this. How can you guys date so short? Like, bro, in the religious world, bro, we'll date for a couple months. Even me and Sephora, when we dated for a shorter period of time, but then we stopped and we came back. It was the whole thing. But normally people date 3 months, 4 months. That's it. Boom, marriage. It's either going to happen after 3 months or not. And we have this thing, Shomer Nagia, right? We don't touch. Oh, I've been in so many serious relationships. I'm talking about serious conversations, this, emotions, this. I never hugged the girl. You know what I'm saying? Like, I never hugged her. I have no idea. I never hugged her. but we were working, trying to get married, or we got engaged. Like I had engagements, it didn't work out. But the point is just saying that that is the dynamic because we want to get into that world where we're going back and forth saying, hey, you know what? I don't want to waste my energy on a relationship. I want to utilize a marriage so I could connect to God at a higher level in both of us, every aspect. So, anyways, so the point is just saying that the point is just saying that that relationship, that power that you were discussing, and the roles that you're saying is because the basis of the marriage is this. And I'll tell you like this. I'm just saying it just it's a tradition, right? It's a tradition, and I'll say like the big Kabbalah secret. They say like this that, and they talk about the greatness of the woman. So it's like this. So the point is the same. Say the first, there's two Adam and Eves, right? There was one set and there was a second set, right? One set, the Torah describes them as being like back to back, right? The second one, it describes them, her coming out of the side, rib, whatever you want to say, right? So the Kabbalah goes into the first one, and they said what's being described in the first one is that when man and woman were created, they were at the exact same level. Like they were receiving God's light force. They were receiving God's life force independent of each other at the same level. But what happened is that Eve came to understand that she can get even more energy, more light. Well, how does Eve get more light? Eve gets more light because she puts Adam in a particular position. And so even though they're receiving independently, but if they play this role, and so she actually convinces Adam to play this role as kind of like the quarterback. And then so she becomes the wide receiver, right? Together, they score touchdowns, right? So in this case, so the role of man and woman came into an account because the woman is able to receive more. She's able to receive more. And so that's the concept when you hear the Midrashim talk about the sun and the moon and how they would start off as the same size, and then the moon shrunk itself, and it became that was really the relationship of the first man and woman, right? But they explain it. The Midrashim explain it through the sun and the moon and and shrinking itself. And they said so when God shrunk the moon, I felt a certain way about it. But then it brought in all the stars to comfort the moon, and those are the children, right? So the power of more light coming into the world was a relationship between God and the feminine aspect of creation. And the feminine aspect of creation molded itself into this frame of Malchut, which is the manifestation of all light. But it requires the man to be Ze'er and Pin, right? Hesed Gavor Tefer Netzach Hod Yesod. That's the man. The woman is Malchut. The Malchut is a manifestation. Mashiach comes from manifestation. Judah is Yehuda is Malchut. King David is Malchut, right? So that's the dynamic. So when the man is acting the way that he's supposed to, and he's bringing the light of the God into the home, his wife receives that, and then she showers the entire world with light, right? Not just her household, not just her husband, but literally the whole entire world, right? From her home, right? So anyway, so it's just that's the idea. So later on this evening, I don't know what you guys' schedule is later on, like what's right now 6, so like maybe like 21 o'clock my time or something like this, 21 o'clock. We're just going to do a Pesach class, just a small thing. Just it's more so like just having the content and being able. And so OTNL, maybe I invite some other people. I don't know, but it's not like such a big class thing. But it's more so just starting this process of the Haggadah, right? So what I'm doing is I'm starting a Haggadah. We started a little bit earlier with OTNL today, so I want to do another class later on tonight and start the Haggadah, but with Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. So we're going to go through the Haggadah as much as we can, and we're going to go through it for Rabbi Jonathan Sachs' perspective. And so we're going to get all the different aspect of the actual Haggadah, the Seder itself, and and then we'll have a pretty good frame of that, and then we could focus on the halacha and things like that too. So I don't know if you guys are around, but
Yes, yes. Please send us a link. We'll join in.
all right. So 20 or 21 o'clock. But it's like 3
Okay.
4 hours, for like 4 hours from now.
Okay.
All right. Anyways, all right. So any last points, ideas?
Anything? Anything?
No, I was actually thinking about wondering if you had heard that Jochebed and Miriam were the midwives. Had you ever come across that point?
Yeah, they said Yocheved was.
Yes.
Yocheved and Pura and Shifra and Pura, and
Yes,
I,
sir.
and you're saying Miriam was also involved in that? Yeah, why not? It was her
Yeah.
mom. It was her mom.
Hmm. Yeah, I was just wondering if you had heard that because I thought that was like very very interesting that um they would stand up and make, well, Miriam especially with her father,
Yeah,
and then actually go the distance of even preserving the life once the decree had been sent out to yeah, I just thought that was a really good point, and thanks for the lesson. It was really good.